Hello and welcome everyone to this first virtual edition of Capacity Asia. You have joined our global keynotes track for a session entitled State of the Market, Demystifying Business in China. Before we get started in a moment, I'd like to thank our partner for this session, Chayora, who are helping to make this event possible. Please do stop by their booth during the day and say hello. Here's our lineup of fantastic speakers for the session. Before I hand over to our moderator, James McCartney, who's Executive Vice President of Sales for Chayora, a quick note. If you could ask any questions during the session on the live chat function on Swapcard, we'll be able to address them. The session will also be available for 30 days on demand afterwards for anyone who's missed it. With that, over to you, James.
Hi, thank you, James, and welcome everybody. And firstly, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I know this is a global event, so who knows where you may be joining us from. I myself am based in Singapore for Chayora, and as James said, I'm the EVP of Sales for Asia Pacific. So the concept for this, this keynote was really to get together some industry leaders to really take us through some insights around demystifying doing business in China. So there are many opportunities that foreign companies face with China, and that's not just including the large and fast growing domestic market and improving position there. But also the various investor-friendly policies in regional and centrally controlled special economic and high-tech development zones. And we see this with certain companies. You know, if we look at some of the manufacturing companies, Volkswagen themselves back in 2017 actually sold 41.5% of all of its passenger vehicles in the Chinese market. So there are huge opportunities if you get this right. So the panel that we have today, hopefully, and what we will try and do during this period is actually sort of provide you with some insight of how these organizations and the companies they represent have actually supported businesses setting up and managing through that soft landing in China. So as James said, please do ask any questions as we go through the panel, and we'll try and integrate those into the conversation to make this as interactive as we possibly can. So without further ado, I will start with asking our panelists to introduce themselves. So Yali, maybe I could start with yourself, if you could just introduce yourself and a little bit of a background.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Yali Liu, EVP of Chayora. I'm responsible for network and strategy. A bit about myself. So I grew up in China, had my undergraduate from Peking University in Beijing, and then went to the US for graduate school, and work-wise spent over 18 years with Verizon in the US. Basically in various positions responsible for global network planning and product development. But in the last 6 years, I'm essentially back based in Beijing. And thought it worth mentioning is that during the last 6 years, I took the initiative and drive building the first internet exchange in mainland China. And I joined Chayora at the beginning of the year, and Chayora, our company, we build hyperscale data center in mainland China. So our focus is only in mainland China. Our first data center campus has 8 standalone data center buildings being built with 300 megawatt power and scalable up to 25,000 racks serving greater Beijing area. And our campus is now live with phase 1 operational, and it's a uptime tier 3 and also OCP ready certified facility. So that's about me and the company. Thank you.
Thanks, Yali. And maybe if we move on to yourself, just for a little bit of background. I don't know if your video is working for us at the moment.
Yep, coming online. Cool, great. Thank you, James. Yeah, so my name is Yao. I'm with Alibaba Cloud, and I'm actually based in Singapore. And so I look after a lot of the network-related products like edge computing, CDN, cloud communications, video cloud. So a lot of these products in terms of the international deployment and helping and working with our customers who are looking to deploy in China, which is the heart of the topic today. I work with a lot of these customers in China as well. And so Alibaba Cloud, I think most of us will probably be familiar with. We are the cloud arm of Alibaba Group, and we are the largest cloud provider in China, and obviously serving a lot of different customers. Very excited to be on the panel. Thank you for the invite, James, and very much looking forward to discussing with everybody.
No, absolute pleasure. And I think, what is that market position now? Something in the region of 42% of the cloud market in China?
It's huge.
All right. And finally, Tom, again, thank you for joining the discussion today. So Tom Duncan.
Hi, thanks everybody. My name's Tom Duncan. I look after the data center platform for CBRE. We work with a lot of global corporate clients, advising them on the best place to deploy their data centers and where they can best help locate their facilities across Asia Pac. And so we work essentially providing market analytics. We work with end users who are looking to deploy in the buildings. And then we also work with developers who are looking to invest and deploy capital into the asset class.
Oh, sorry, I was just on mute there. Perfect. All right. So look, let's start the conversation. And as I said, just to reiterate, guys, anybody who is participating, please do send in any questions that you'd like the panel to ask. But the first piece I'd really like to get a view on is some of the market challenges to working in China. So maybe, Tom, as you're dealing with some of the enterprise, and we just finished with you, maybe if you could just sort of explain some of the challenges you've actually supported your customers with over the recent sort of months, years, accessing that market.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the main things that we deal with a lot in data centers is around selection. And when you're selecting a partner, trust, comfort, these are all critical factors. So despite the fact this is a tech sector, you're really sort of bringing the human element into it. And where we've seen a lot of people moving slowly into China when we're working with global corporates, it's trying to understand the local market, the local way of doing business, the local regulations, and finding a partner who can help them navigate what they need to deliver the services they need for their end users and their customers. So I think the most critical factor that we've seen, and the most successful people within the Chinese market working with global corporates, have been those that can provide that level of comfort and can help them understand the market in greater detail.
All right, so how does that then link? I mean, obviously from a data center perspective, that sort of then plays on to, from a cloud perspective, it's that sort of next stage evolution of infrastructure within the market. So Yao, from your perspective, the sort of work that Alibaba are doing and Ali Cloud are providing for international customers, what are you seeing as those challenges, or even the perceptions of international customers working with yourselves?
Yeah, I think the key thing to beginning to doing business in China is probably to understand that I think a lot of us know that it's a different market. It's the language is different, the way of doing business is different, but including things like the rules and regulations are very different. And I think the best way to treat the China market is its own separate region, right? Where mostly you'll be looking for new partners, whether it's from going to market perspective or whether it's looking at, say, hosting or cloud services or any of those, right? I think that's the beginning of how we start doing business in China. Of course, like there's a lot of hairy details that come right into below as you dig into the details. So let's take, for instance, the most basic stuff, right? We talk about hosting, we talk about cloud services. Setting up a website requires you to have ICP license, right? So for most of us who are not in China, that will be something that you have not heard of, right? What exactly is that? How do you go about applying for it? I think that's where Alibaba can help. That's where a lot of the partners in China can help, and I think that's where you can kind of need guidance to go through all the different steps to get started, to get launched, to start using the services in China itself.
So that, I mean, that's an interesting point. And I think, you know, a lot of people look upon the Chinese market as being heavily regulated. And I think, you know, all markets have a certain regulation. But Yali, from a data center perspective, my understanding is that that's quite regulated with regards to the permissions and the licenses. So how does Chayora manage that process on behalf of yourselves and also your international customers?
Yeah, so definitely the data center market is very regulated, and we really need to put a lot of focus and has a very structured approach to the regulation to make sure we're in compliance. But just without going into all the details, but we just need to work diligently through the whole process and look at the regulation in detail to ensure we're doing the right thing and going through step by step and with the right local knowledge, which is very important. You know, there are different ways that you can translate certain policy, for example. So we need to with the local knowledge and working closely with the authority, we can work through this, and we are able to get all the licenses that's needed and have the right structure set up in China to go through this, to be successful in building the data center. And along with that, I just want to say the market itself or the regulation is changing as well, and it's from our observation, it's going to be more open, and we know that the foreign ownership has for basically foreign investment percentage has it's going to change. It's going to further open up. This year that we see the announcement from MIT that they're going to gradually open up foreign ownership in data center and cloud services. And they will start with a certain special economic zone in Shanghai and Hainan first, but it's going to further open up. So there will be continued opportunity for cloud service providers.
Okay, so I mean, that sort of takes us, that sort of again links back to Tom, what you were saying about that trust, you know, partnering with somebody who has the knowledge and the ability to support you through that. What are the most recent changes? I think there's certain changes in the foreign ownership also around financial services. Are you seeing then a knock-on effect, Tom, with international customers looking at changing their scope around cloud adoption, data center selection because of those changes?
Yeah, 100%. We're seeing a lot more interest from the global banks into China. It's relatively small scale requirements at the moment, but they are looking to pick off a couple of markets. And by that, I mean the tier 1 markets. So you've got initial deployments looking at Shanghai, and then they're looking at maybe Beijing, Tianjin, and or Shenzhen, Guangzhou, or the Bay Area there. Definitely they feel far more comfortable about deploying into the Chinese market than they did maybe 24 months ago. I think they are certainly looking at what I would call a global MNC facing co-location market. I think there are aspects of the Chinese co-location market that are more domestic focused. And really that comes down into the operational track record, comfort, and capability in that sector. And a lot of that's to do with communication, because I think originally China has supported the greatest urban migration there has ever been. And to do that, a lot of the deployment, it was data center less as a service, but more as a commodity. And I think that's changing within the Chinese marketplace. And I think there are companies like yourselves, Chayora, who are at the forefront of doing that and driving that forward. And I think we're really seeing the global corporates starting to get more comfortable with the Chinese market. As Yao said earlier, looking at China is definitely different and distinct, but I think there are some areas where the overlap is getting a bit closer. And we're certainly seeing people, instead of, how can I put it, scratching their heads with China and not having a solution from the global corporates, they've definitely got solutions now, and they're starting to get comfortable with those solutions and looking how best to deploy those.
Sorry, on mute. Gosh, it's not like we haven't been doing these online sessions for the last almost year, and I still forget to take myself off mute. We are starting to get some questions coming in, but just on that, I wanted to also just bring you back into the conversation there. So obviously there's a change, and I mean, I myself am speaking to financial services companies, and they're sort of saying, yes, there is definitely a change. And one of the topics they keep bringing up, and they seem to be struggling with, is, what am I, as an international bank, allowed to put onto the public cloud? I mean, how do they even go around trying to start to fathom what those policies and regulations are?
I think that's a lot of, it's no different from, let's say, Europe and GDPR, right? That's a lot of rules and regulations when it comes to each and every region, especially around data privacy, protection, the user rights, around what can you deploy and what can you not deploy, or even things going into like licensing regime and regulatory and stuff like that, right? So, a lot of what we do in terms of helping our customers around that, especially around banking and finance and fintech, is that we have actually deployed a fintech cloud in China that basically, by default, complies with a lot of these rules and regulations. Of course, we don't profess to be, financial experts, right? When it comes to, how do you go about applying for a banking license? But when it comes to a lot of the technical cloud services, how do you deploy on the public cloud? How do you protect your user data? All that kind of stuff. A lot of that has been built right into the fintech cloud that Alibaba Cloud has deployed in China, and actually that simplifies a lot of the work of looking at things like hosting and compute and storage and databases and networks and stuff like that, right? And so it makes it very easy for our customers, especially in the financial industry, to quickly deploy into China itself, right? And then that's what we've been seeing. Like we've been seeing a lot of interest, to Tom's point, we've been seeing a lot of interest from banks around the world, fintech companies around the world, in China. It's a huge market with a lot of users, obviously, and a lot of potential for growth. And we've been seeing a lot of these interests in coming into the market. How do we go about get started in China? And Alibaba Cloud is there to help a lot of these customers to solve a lot of these problems that we've been seeing with the fintech cloud.
Okay, and look, just one of the other questions that's just come in, Tom, really aimed at yourself there around some of the DC China. What are the key elements? Is it pricing, carrier neutral, infrastructure, tier 3, all of those sorts of elements, as well as operations? And when answering this, maybe if you could just also think about, really, you mentioned about trust as well. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on what you mentioned there.
Sure, I think we're starting to see this more and more in a modern business context. It's the trusted partner, the trusted advisor. People's IT strategies are now global. Everybody has a global focus. A lot of multinationals are branded or structured to be global rather than regional or countrywide. Therefore, they're looking for a similar level of service provision across the scope, across the breadth of their markets in which they're active. We're starting to see that reflected in hyperscalers as well. There's a lot of hyperscalers looking to go for fewer providers or service providers rather than more. And so what you want is, you want that level of normality. It's somebody who says, look, don't worry, I've got this. I understand your problem. We're managing you in several different markets, one of which happens to be China. There's always going to be local variances that you need to work around. But broadly speaking, I understand you, I understand what you need from me, and I understand your pain points. And quite frankly, linking that into price, you can have the cheapest data center in the world, and if it falls over every 5-10 minutes, it just doesn't work. It's not fit for purpose. So broadly speaking, what people are looking for is that level of service provision. And if they can get that from 2 or more parties, then obviously price point becomes an option, which is why we see in a lot of markets, the data center is pretty unique in the fact it's very end user or customer driven. There are very few big customers in the market. They're buying a lot of capacity. Therefore, they can drive the levels of service they want, and they try and bring partners into various markets where maybe they're not operating. That creates opportunity, and it also creates competition as well. But the critical element is they want to bring people that they trust or work with people that they trust in those markets.
Okay, perfect. And look, just there's a question here for yourself, Yali, as well, based on your experience of setting up. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of talk around Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, lots of popular hosting sort of locations in China. But which other cities do you think are getting popular, and where is the sort of high quality data center demands in China, and how do you see the data center requirements in the Greater Bay Area in China? Maybe you could sort of comment on those elements.
Well, I think definitely the tier 1 cities that you mentioned. So the Greater Bay Area and then Shanghai area and the Greater Beijing area. And then you also heard there are other locations that's toward the west side of China. But I think that you need to really balance everything, including the network and the customers that you're serving. So I would still think where the majority of the populations are and where the business are, that's where a data center business mainly would be focused on. But there are definitely benefit of having data center in other locations, but it's still serving the some of those major area.
And you touched on the connectivity. Obviously, connectivity in the market is hugely important. Any market, otherwise a data center is a very big cold storage facility. So how do you work and partner with the network providers in China? I mean, based on your experience as well, you probably had that engagement whilst you were at Verizon as well. But sort of how are you managing that for Chayora from that network connectivity piece?
Yes, so the connectivity for data center is very important, especially for mainland China, right? So in mainland China, the basic telecom service providers, there are only 5 of them.
Oh, I think we may have lost Yali. Yep, I think we've lost Yali just for a moment. So what we'll do, that's not a problem. We'll come back to Yali because there's a couple of questions coming in around the internet exchanges, and I know Yali was involved in setting up China Cash. But Yao, so other than fintech cloud, what other sort of opportunities are you seeing, and what other sort of drive are you seeing from international companies coming in? I mean, are you working with the big manufacturers out there as well, the Volkswagen, the Bosches? I mean, Bosch, it's their second largest market with 55,000 people employed, So what sort of services are you providing to these people? And Yali, we'll come back to you because to let you finish once, now you're back. But yeah, if you could just answer that would be great.
Sure. So I use fintech as just an example, but we are seeing interest across the board, right? And a lot of that is driven, historically it was driven by a lot of the manufacturing, a lot of the factories, a lot of the the manufacturing was happening in China itself. And so you mentioned Bosch, guys like Volkswagen. A lot of companies were building their factories in China, and with the manufacturing and upscaling of that manufacturing and the improvement in technology around it, we've been seeing some very interesting stuff around things like IoT, right? Especially with 5G deployment, around things like how do we use video to monitor all the conditions in the factories and making sure that the production lines are running smoothly. things like that, right? Those have been some very interesting areas in the area of manufacturing. But beyond that, I think what we do see, and I think what a lot of people would recognize, is that you're talking about 1 billion consumers, right? Any consumer brand is very interested, to operate in China itself, right? From the McDonald's and the Starbucks, to all the online retail partners like the Lululemons of the world, right? The Nikes of the world, right? And we work together with a lot of these, from Alibaba Cloud perspective, as well as from the Tmall, Taobao perspective, to help them enter into China and help them to serve 1 billion consumers, right? And on that front, we've been seeing, depending on the different customers and depending on the individual brands, what their angle of interest is. Some of them could be hosting directly on Tmall and Taobao. Some of them could potentially be building up their presence themselves, hosting on Alibaba Cloud. And we're very much looking to support all our partners in terms of addressing the China market across all the different verticals.
So just extending that, so say a brand comes into the China market, say, and let's choose a Lululemon, right? I mean, everyone loves Lululemon, apparently. It's also very expensive. But when you actually partner with them, do you actually then take them all the way through not just the Alibaba Cloud and helping them set that infrastructure up from a technical perspective, but do you then also extend that out and help them with the logistics side as well, setting that up?
It really depends. So if you look at, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with Alibaba Group. So the group itself has like the e-commerce arm, right? It has also the logistics arm, the cloud arm, obviously, payments, yada yada, travel. That's actually pretty extensive. So what usually do is that, depending on what the needs and requirements of the customer, we can help them with a whole bunch of different stuff that they might need, right? Let's say they want to set up a Tmall shop, then the Tmall team will come into the picture to help them with that. Let's say they are looking to set up also a website with their own presence, shopping cart, all the good stuff that you need to complete the transaction online, as well as the deliver stuff. Then that will be both from Alibaba Cloud perspective as well as the China logistics perspective, right? And the good thing within Alibaba, especially when you're looking at e-commerce, let's say Lululemon being a commerce brand, right? It's much easier for us to deploy the different resources and help the brands to penetrate and enter and get started in China itself.
Okay, perfect. And Yali, welcome back. Little network issue. Considering we're on Capacity Asia, it couldn't be more ironic if we tried. Look, just thinking, going back to the question we were talking about, the importance of the network connectivity and obviously working with the 3 Cs. But also, if you could just add into that, because there was a question that was asked around internet exchange points, and is there any internet exchange point in China where overseas carriers directly connect to Chinese content and cloud providers, was a specific question, and I thought you are probably best qualified to answer that one.
Yeah, sure. It's not just the 3 Cs. There are also China broadband and also CITIC. So there are 5 basic telecom providers, but there are they also have partners that we can work with, and also in collaboration with this 5 licensed basic telecom service providers, that we can ensure that we have optimized network connectivity. So it's very important not only to have the optimized local access, but also long distance connectivity to other locations if the data center is not in a metropolitan area. But regarding the internet exchange, actually, the exchange itself is a local concept. So it's the internet exchange in mainland China. Firstly, it's relatively new. So it's like 15 years. I guess it's the first one was like 4 or 5 years ago, the first one we built. but so it's behind the rest of the world by maybe 15 years, or not just the rest of the world, the US and Europe. So right now it doesn't allow international company outside of mainland China to connect to it directly. However, the major multinationals, they do have service, they do have business in mainland China and have its own AS number, then you can connect to the exchange directly in China. So that's how it works. So it's available only in mainland China, but it's available for all companies as long as you have a operation or have AS in the mainland China.
Okay, so you have to be running that domestic network or having access to it with that AS number, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But also I want to mention, just since we're on this, is that the internet exchange as it stands right now, it's still relatively new, a new concept, but it's being supported by the officials. So MIT actually has been adapting to the internet exchange concept, and they are sponsoring new internet exchange. To my understanding, they're sponsoring one in Hangzhou and plan to sponsor another one probably in Shenzhen. So it's something that's coming, and I believe it will become more popular, are readily available, more widely available in mainland China in the coming years.
Okay.
And
right.
Yeah.
All right. And so from that perspective, I mean, for many years, data center providers, talked about carrier neutrality. Then they talked about, proximity to the cloud and access to the cloud. Tom, what are you seeing in China with regards to the customers that you're representing? And obviously you're helping them do site selections, locations. Are these some of the questions that they're asking, from a network connectivity, access to the likes of Ali and other cloud providers within the market? Is that important on their list and selection criteria?
Yes, I would say not as important in China as I think operational capability and ease of doing business. But quite frankly, if they don't have the right access to the right network, then the whole site won't work, so they just won't deploy anything. And I think it's more indicative of where I think, as Yali was saying, the Chinese market started a little bit slower, shall we say, than Europe and the US, but it's certainly caught up and or catching up fast. And we're seeing, you can get a sort of global facing data center in China relatively easily now, whereas even, I would say, as little as 2 to 3 years ago, that would potentially be a bit of a struggle. And so I think the market has matured very rapidly. And what we're really seeing around network and connectivity, we're starting to get that luxury of, no, I want to be in a certain area within a certain, should we say, a micro market within a wider market. And we're starting to see more focus on that. Well, who's in there? If we're looking to sort of widen up the conversation beyond just network, we talked a little bit about fintech earlier. Is there a fintech ecosystem? Are the people that I'm working with in that building as well? And also, where are other people located within the market that I may need to connect into? And don't forget, China, geographically speaking, is massive. Shanghai is massive as a city just to work around. And so that brings with it a whole different sort of problems that they frankly won't have had in many other cities in Asia, because the tier one markets before, the Tokyos, Hong Kong, Singapore, Sydney, relatively small geographically speaking. And I know Tokyo's larger, but there's only sort of really areas you could work in for DC. And so this brings with it a whole set of new problems. But I think critically, and where we're really seeing people starting to dig down into, I think this issue about being able to choose connectivity and choose, have choice of connectivity, choice of partners, just shows how the market is growing and maturing.
Okay, and yeah, how, I mean, this is something for me because I don't know, and maybe some of our audience aren't aware either. But are there differences on how, say, if I was an enterprise customer, how I would connect into Ali Cloud in China versus how I would necessarily interconnect with you externally? Or is it the same process? How does that work?
By and large, the process is similar. Of course, we treat the two regions pretty differently, like China and rest of the world. But you look at connection points, and some of the most logical. Let's say internationally, let's say this part of the world, we'll most likely interconnect in Singapore and Hong Kong, and the usual suspects, right? Frankfurt and all. In China, likewise, we'll pick some of these key locations to work together with the partners and interconnect with them, depending on where they are situated, right? But by and large, it's not that different. Actually, it's not that different. Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to check. I wasn't actually sure on the cloud connectivity and obviously the differences between the internet exchanges internationally and what's happening in China as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, so look, just to sort of change a little bit, I'd just like to get your view, Tom, about the sort of companies that you're supporting. Obviously, we've touched a little bit around financial services and fintech, but what are the other organizations from an international perspective that CBRE are supporting within the China market?
Yeah, we're seeing some of the tech companies looking to come into the sector, particularly American tech companies. We're looking at some of the sort of chip manufacturers, those kind of folks. We're seeing them certainly increasing their interest in the Chinese market. We're seeing them looking to deploy platforms very similar to what they've got in the US. And again, China is a market that can potentially support that. They are certainly looking at how they diversify in. Beyond that, the global enterprises, at the moment, the bigger enterprise requirements don't tend to be deploying direct co-location. They are piggybacking on cloud platforms, or they are looking at, it's the cupboard under the stairs scenario. They've got 7, 8 racks or whatever in the, a small machine room in the office. What I think we will see is, and this has certainly happened across the rest of Asia, is that will start to change as they start to deploy that. And there's two reasons for that. One, I'm obviously a sucker because I'm in the game, if you like. I don't think that's the best technical solution for your data center space, is to stick it in a cupboard under the stairs in the office. That's the first point. The second point is it's an anchor on your real estate asset class. And we all know, the pandemic, one of the big impacts on that has been in the office sector, and how the office sector is going to evolve beyond that. Everybody's talking about greater flexibility in office, and I don't want to derail the conversation and talk about that. Frankly, I'm the wrong person to do it. But definitely, it's too early to say in the impacts of COVID about how that's going to work on the office. And everybody knows that your big costs as an enterprise are humans, offices, and IT tech. And having an anchor, or one anchoring the other, and not allowing you complete freedom of strategy is a potential issue. And so I think you're going to see a lot more people looking at outsourced partnership around the tech sector.
So just so I'm clear on that. So really sort of moving away from having those comms rooms, because it's, as you say, it's anchoring them to that office location, correct? Is that what
Yeah, because it's essentially, if you're looking at synchronous replication, moving one of these platforms from their compliance periods can take a couple of years. Office leases, frankly, the IT teams and the real estate teams don't necessarily communicate brilliantly, and so they're not managing it. So you'll find the real estate team have got a great idea to move the office to somewhere cheaper or downsize or smaller, and the IT team comes in and says, well, what about those 10 racks in the cupboard under the stairs? Well, you're not moving those, or we need 18 months to move them. And that's where you can find, and I've seen countless examples where people have had to extend offices by 18, 24 months solely to accommodate moving out the data center, and then they can get on with their office strategy. And again, when there's going to be more pressure across enterprise on costs, more pressure on the office strategy being supportive of what the business needs. I think anything where you are potentially hindering that is going to be a problem. That's why I think you're going to see people looking more and more at this.
So really we're saying sort of centralization. So yeah, I mean, that plays into your hands, right? I mean, if we're moving out from, as Tom eloquently put it, the cupboard under the stairs, that infrastructure needs somewhere to live, and that's either going to go into a co-location facility, or it's absolutely easy pickings to migrate and centralize onto a cloud platform where you don't have the challenges, because actually people are working from home. So are you starting to see an uptake in that?
I think we see, what I call the mass migration of a lot of stuff from, the closet under the staircase, into the cloud. That's been happening for years, right? That's kind of part of the big to the cloud kind of movement. I think we all know that, and that continues to trend, right? That trend still continues to happen. I don't think we're seeing it diminishing or going away anytime soon, because there's just so much, of legacy stuff that's still moving up into the cloud, and even including guys who are finding it a lot easier to go digital, cloud first, right? When historically they may not have done that, right? You're looking at like 50-year-old manufacturing companies, they find it a lot easier to just deploy entirely in the cloud with all the elastic compute and storage and networking and databases without having to go figure out how to manage that IT infrastructure, right? And I think that's what we're seeing broadly. I think the other thing that we are seeing that's also really interesting, and I saw a question here around some of the product launches by Alibaba Cloud in 2021. I'll speak to one, right? We're constantly innovating. We're constantly thinking about what kind of new services, new products that Alibaba Cloud can put out there to serve our customers better. And I think one of the big things that's been trending in the last 1 year and this year is the whole 5G deployment, right? And we've been working together with a lot of partners in China, the usual big ISPs that I think we are all familiar with. I think what we are seeing is also what can we unlock with 5G, with low latency, moving stuff to the edge, and moving some of the compute loads and all the workloads in the central cloud right to the edge, closer to the end user, and what can that do, right? There's some very interesting experimentation around that's happening right now, right? And making it very easy for customers to take advantage of that, take advantage of the edge network that we are building that is in complement to the central cloud, right? And so things like, for instance, cloud gaming is one that we start to see a lot more interest around with low latency as you move the game off the device into the edge cloud, and serving your customers, your gamers around that. Things like driverless cars is something where you start to see a lot of that moving into the edge. Things like IoT applications, a lot of IoT applications happening right at the edge, in the factory, in the office, in the home. All those are new stuff, that's being made possible by 5G, being made possible by the combination of 5G and the edge and the cloud. And we've been experimenting with a lot of those right now, and very excited to see what new stuff we can launch around 2021.
Yeah, and I mean, bringing that to yourself, Yali, I mean, there's a lot there, and certainly, if we think about automated vehicles, I mean, where do you see, Chayora as a business, you've got, and I know I work there as well, but I'm trying to be a good moderator, everybody. But where do you see the opportunity for Chayora moving forward within the China market, both within Tianjin and any expansions that you can share with the guests?
Sure. Yeah, well, our business is really building a data center, right? A hyperscale data center. So we have a data center campus serving the greater Beijing area, and we're already looking at the next data center campus serving greater Shanghai area. So just from a broader scope, so we build a data center campus for technology companies to put be it cloud or their infrastructure, right, in the data center itself. And as you may know, that data center is part of the basic infrastructure initiative that announced by the government. So it's one of the basic pillars. And so it's getting a lot of attention. So there's great opportunity if you're in the business, basically for supporting the digital economy. So yeah, it's beyond just Chayora. So we build a data center campus for customers who could be, in online retail business or, financials or, whatever their business sectors may be. And there are a lot of opportunities for international business in China's digital economy.
Yeah, and I mean, and ultimately, it's the building of that sort of almost layer of infrastructure that actually holds up everything else, right? It enables, the cloud to actually function and everyone to
exactly.
move.
Exactly. Yes.
But linked with the connectivity. All right. Okay. So what about just staying with yourself, Yali? You mentioned earlier, and I made an error, and I talked about the 3 Cs, and you corrected me that there's actually there's also other providers in the country. So in your experience, how do international companies sort of manage to liaise? What are some of the challenges that you've experienced liaising from an international perspective, or supporting international customers on selecting the right network partners in China?
Well, so definitely need to, it depends on, which sector or what we're trying to achieve. So if we're talking about selecting a new data center, then, ensure it's a carrier neutral, we call it, would be important. That doesn't mean that you can't work with, you can't partner with a major telecom service provider, but you just need to make sure that you have the ability to work with different network providers. So at our data center, then we make sure that we have all 5 major the 5 basic telecom service providers, in addition to other ISPs, that they have connectivity into our data center to ensure that we carrier neutral perspective.
Yeah, and I think we've also got Telstra in the facility as well.
Yes, Telstra PBS. Yes, yeah, at our facility. Yeah, but just from a general perspective, you just need to make sure that the data center that you selected are carrier neutral. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So just a little bit of a flip. So we've been talking a lot about the technical aspects of deploying and some of the challenges international companies will face. Yao, I'm going to come to you more about the culture. I mean, do you think, there are companies out there that you've worked with who have made mistakes from a cultural perspective in actually setting up their businesses in China?
There's so many of them, including some of the companies that I work with.
I'm not asking by the way, just examples, because I think it's something, we can talk about tech, but it's something which I think a lot of people forget about.
Yeah, I think the advice that I usually give people when they ask me, like, how do you think about the culture in China? How do you think about doing business in China? In general, language aside, obviously, not everybody speaks Mandarin, but I think the starting point is always try to understand that the way things are done are very different, and kind of go in with that assumption that it's going to be very different, right? I think a lot of times when we do business, we have a certain assumption, okay, things should be done this way, right? Things should be done that way. Like, let's say, for instance, I had this conversation once with, in my previous life, with a general counsel, and US, and we were saying like, oh, in China, there's this notion of 盖章, which is, you need to, stamp the documents, right? In the US, there's no such thing, right? You can just do the DocuSign and you can sign the thing and you're up and running, right? But you do need to stamp the documents in China, but it's just two different ways of doing business. Culturally, it's very different. I think the best way for any two cultures to come together is always try to reach out, try to extend understanding to the other side, and go on the assumption that this is how they are doing, the things are done there, and let me try to appreciate how it's done and work with that. And I think the most important thing is people appreciate it, right? The partners you work with, the customers you work with, they appreciate the fact that you take the effort to understand why, you take the effort to figure out like how do you actually try to make this work, even though the practices are different, the way things are done are different, right? And I think that goes a very, very long way in terms of doing business in China.
And Tom, really the same question to yourself, and again, not asking for any names, but I imagine, and maybe you can elaborate on this, that you're dealing from an international perspective with those international companies going in. Now, is it your teams outside of China? Are they in China? I mean, how do you overcome some of those elements?
It's trying to have a foot in both camps. And that's having local expertise and local language capability on the ground, who understand local relationships, local business practices. And then it's having very often people based outside who understand where the customer's coming from, what their main requirements are, and are able to message back to the customer that they, as Yao said, they're not going to get the McDonald's Big Mac, the cookie cutter approach exactly as they want it. And so it's about trying to bridge that gap and that connectivity. And I mean, quite frankly, that's the biggest challenge we have as advisors, is finding people with the capability to speak both languages, or three languages: Mandarin, data centers, and English. And to have the gravitas and frankly the track record, because it boils down to the individual. I mean, we've all had it. We've all been in the room, and you start getting, about data centers, and you start getting quizzed sort of quite strongly about your capability and do you understand it, particularly when you come necessarily from, CBRE is very much an office shop, and so you're just an office broker who's doing a bit of data centers on the side. So there are all these things to work through, but I think the critical point though is literally finding that level of trust that I talked about at the beginning, that yes, we know it's different. People are getting used to the fact, globalization's a reality. People are getting used to the fact of local differences. People are, and quite frankly, enjoying it and appreciating it. You do see that, but there has to be that level of where we can try and get people to come together in a room. And that's going to be, I think, one of the challenges of COVID, maybe changing tack slightly, is it's a face-to-face culture doing businesses in data centers. It very much is, but you just go and speak to the investment guys. They're deploying a lot of capital into this sector, and they like to sit in front of people and sit in front of the data center site in China, meet the C-suite team, go, yeah, these guys get data centers. Yes, they look capable and confident and all the rest of it. That's going to be very, very hard to do, frankly, through this format that we're on just now. And so how's that going to translate into the modern business world? How's it going to translate into data centers? These are all questions that I think people are starting to answer. And to sort of bring it back to your initial question and where we sort of dug into it, it's about bridging that connectivity gap, if you like. Making people feel comfortable about deploying capital, making people feel comfortable about making a long-term commitment. Because if you're signing up, say, to a cloud contract, everybody says, oh yes, cloud is flexible. You can cancel it tomorrow, kind of thing. Well, Yao's probably going to want 30 days notice at least, I'm guessing. But the whole point is, strategically, you can't do that. You can't get out of the cloud in 30 days or get out of a cloud provider in 30 days unless you're very sure you know exactly what you're doing and you know it's the right thing to do.
Okay, I mean, on that's fascinating. And Yali, I mean, Tom brought up a valid point, and I mean, I don't think you can have a single panel discussion these days when we're all on Zoom without bringing up COVID. So, I mean, how is Chayora looking to deal with the challenges of actually, as Tom said, you know, it is a people business, you know, it's about that physical infrastructure, you know, people want to see it. So, you know, how are you going to sort of get over that hurdle of, you know, people maybe not being able to travel for another 6, maybe even 12 months?
Well, we have online video and everything, right? Like a Zoom, but just on that point, that actually maybe it's worth mentioning China from a travel perspective within China is basically open. The COVID is under control, as you may know. So, but for I guess for foreign investment, if you're really you really want to see it when it's through online. The other thing is you could send someone from within mainland China. If you can't travel to into China, then you could send someone to actually have a physical be physically on site to look through it. So that's not sure if that answered your question, James.
No, absolutely, Yali, it does. And I think everyone is facing the same challenges. And it's not just, you know, Chayora as a business in China, but it's, you know, a lot of data center operators and providers throughout the world, you know, where there are travel restrictions. So, you know, I mean, people always talk about, digital transformation, and has happened so quickly over the last 6 months or 12 months, whatever it is, since this all began.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting to see how that will manifest and how that will be managed, Tom. So that's a good point. I mean, Yao, I'm assuming that I'm asking the right person this question, but I'm going to hazard a guess that the Ali business has increased quite dramatically over the last sort of 6 to 8 months, not having challenges.
Yeah,
well, I'm going to prove me wrong, aren't you?
It has definitely been a very busy year, I'll put it this way, and it has been, you know, in many ways, not just the cloud side of the business. I think we see a lot of that business happening, but even, you know, across the Alibaba group, right? Let's say working from home, right? The whole working from home, we saw a huge uptick in terms of Ting, which is, you know, think of it like Slack, you know, very popular in China. Literally, when the COVID-19 outbreak happened, you know, it shot up to be the #1 app on top of all the apps, right? And because people were just downloading it and using it, you're looking at things like e-commerce. Everybody is buying online. You're looking at grocery delivery. You're looking at things like more and more folks starting to think about going digital. I think what you do see, and I think this is what everybody is starting to realize, is that with COVID-19, you know, what could have taken 5 years to happen is all being compressed and happening within a year in terms of going digital, in terms of everybody accelerating the way to go online and doing business online. And, you know, it's really interesting to see the huge uptake, right? You know, been working very hard this year to support all our customers on that front. And I think, you know, this has been both a very interesting as well as challenging year. You know, I'd love to see, hopefully at the end of the day, despite all that, you know, I do hope that COVID-19 goes away and we can do these panels in person.
Yeah, well, look, I think we all agree with that, and with that, I think we're coming to the end of the panel. I want to thank each of you so much for taking part. It's been really fascinating, and I've really enjoyed moderating it. Any final thoughts? I think, Yao, you've had your final thought, and I agree with you. I can't wait till this is over and we can all meet in person again at these conferences. But Tom, yourself.
I'm sorry, I'm going to be boring. I think that's a great final thought to leave it on. I can't wait until we can get back out there.
Yali?
I guess the only thing I would like to mention is that doing business in China, to do it right, communication with the authority is very important. So, there are certain areas that were not clear, but then you just need to work diligently with the authority. Communication is everything. It could solve a lot of the problems.
Well, look, that's perfect. And I think we're pretty much on time. At least my computer is showing 1500. So again, thanks to everybody that's attended. And we hope you enjoyed and found the panel useful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Just like to say thank you so much to all our panelists and James for moderating. It's been a really great session, and thank you everyone for watching, for asking so many questions. It's been great. I'd just like to thank Chayora once again for their support of this event, and to let you all know that this session, along with all our other sessions, will be available on demand for 30 days after the event. I hope you'll be able to join us for our next session, which is taking place in a minute's time, which is Partner with CMI, Embracing the 5G Era. Thank you very much for joining, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you.